The great meeting hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive dome under the artificial stars. Hundreds of beings from 47 different worlds sat in their assigned sections, talking in dozens of languages that the translation machines turned into a steady hum of voices. The air smelled of recycled oxygen mixed with the various breathing gases that kept all these different life forms alive in one space, Ambassador. Chen Weilin sat quietly in the human section, with 11 other representatives from Earth and its colonies. She watched the other delegates argue about trade rules and shipping costs with the same energy their ancestors once used to fight for survival. The humans had been coming to these meetings for 37 years, always sitting in the same spots, always taking careful notes, always speaking only when someone asked them a direct question. Today felt different, though Chen could not say why. Perhaps it was the way the Corvan delegate waved his thick tentacles when he talked about mineral rights on the outer planets, or maybe it was how the bird-like Zeltharians clicked their beaks impatiently every time someone mentioned the hyperspace relay stations that humans had built throughout the galaxy. The humans had built most of the things these other species used every day. The communication networks that let someone on one side of the galaxy talk to someone on the other side in real time. The early warning systems that detected dangerous asteroids or hostile ships before they became problems. The emergency response teams that showed up whenever there was a disaster or plague. The translation software that let all these different species understand each other. But nobody seemed to remember that the humans had made these things. They just expected them to work. Chen looked down at the tablet in her lap. Resolution 2847C was coming up for a vote soon. She had read it 3 times, and each time it made her feel tired in a way that sleep could not fix. The resolution would force humans to pay a 40% tax on every service they provided to other worlds. Not because the humans were making too much money. Most human services barely broke even. The tax existed because the Altarian Trade Commission thought humans were getting too comfortable in their position as the galaxy's problem solvers. We must ensure that no single species becomes too essential to galactic operations. Delegate Vexhai had said when he introduced the resolution 2 months ago. His crystalline features had sparkled with what Chen now recognized as contempt. The humans provide many services. Yes, but they should not assume they are irreplaceable. Chen remembered her response at the time. She had stood up calmly and said, "The Terran Federation has never claimed to be irreplaceable, Delegate Vexhai. We simply try to help where we can." Vexhai had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Of course you do. And you always come back to help some more, no matter how we treat you. Humans are wonderfully predictable that way." Now, 2 months later, the resolution was about to pass. Chen could see it in the way the delegates moved, the way they whispered to each other, the way they avoided looking at the human section. They had the votes. They would pass their tax, and they expected the humans to complain a little and then get back to work. The vote began. Species after species said yes to Resolution 2847C. The Corvan Collective, yes, even though humans maintained their entire computer network. The Zeltharian Assembly, yes, even though human doctors had saved their world from the Red Plague 15 years ago. The Vegan Republic, yes, even though their entire financial system ran on human-designed security protocols. When they called for the human vote, Chen stood up slowly. Her 11 colleagues stood with her, not because they had planned it, but because they all understood what needed to happen next. The Terran Federation withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately, Chen announced in the same calm voice she always used. We invoke Article 15 of the Founding Charter. All human personnel and assets will be recalled within 90 standard days. The enormous hall fell completely silent. Chen could hear the quiet hum of the life support systems and the soft clicking of the translation machines trying to process what she had said. Then, everyone started talking at once. "This is a negotiation tactic," shouted Delegate Morvac from the Hegemony Worlds. "Humans always come back to the negotiating table. They need us as much as we need them. You cannot simply leave," said Council Leader Zyfex, their energy form flickering with agitation inside its crystal housing. The Founding Charter requires 6 months' notice for withdrawal. Chen picked up her papers and put them neatly in her briefcase. Article 15, subsection 12 allows for immediate withdrawal in cases of systematic discrimination. This resolution qualifies. "But who will maintain the hyperspace beacons?" asked someone from the back of the hall. "Who will coordinate emergency responses?" called another voice. "Who will mediate our trade disputes?" Chen looked around the hall one last time. These beings had shared meals with her, worked with her on difficult problems, even called her friend. But they had never really seen her as an equal. To them, humans were useful servants who could be relied upon to fix problems and absorb insults with equal patience. "You are all intelligent species," she said. "I am sure you will figure it out." She walked toward the exit, her 11 colleagues following in perfect formation. Behind them, the arguing grew louder. She heard Vexai's glass-breaking laugh again. "They will be back within a month," he declared confidently. "Humans need to feel useful. They cannot survive without someone to help." Chen paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. "Goodbye, Delegate Vexai. Good luck with everything." And then the humans walked out. Within hours, human personnel throughout the galaxy received coded messages on their personal communicators. The messages were short and simple. "Operation Silent Exit is now active. Begin withdrawal procedures immediately." On 1700 worlds, humans began to pack. They did not make announcements or hold press conferences. They did not explain their actions to their alien colleagues or neighbors. They simply finished their current projects, transferred what files they could to local authorities, and quietly boarded the next transport ships heading toward human space. The humans who ran the hyperspace relay network uploaded detailed operating manuals to the Galactic database and handed their access codes to the local governments. The humans who managed emergency response teams trained their alien assistants as quickly as possible and left behind careful instructions for handling different types of disasters. The human doctors, engineers, teachers, and technicians all did their best to leave their work in good condition for whoever came next. But they took their knowledge with them. And more importantly, they took their willingness to help. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had spent 12 years developing early warning systems for the Outer Rim territories, packed her research into secure containers and erased her personal files from the computers. Her Corvin assistant, Thekai, watched nervously as she worked. "You are really leaving?" Thekai asked, his tentacles curling with anxiety. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "But the asteroid tracking system needs constant updates. The gravitational calculations require human mathematical models. Without you, we cannot—" "The manuals are very detailed," Sarah interrupted gently. "You are smart, Thekai. Your people are smart. You will learn. But what if we make mistakes? What if we miss something important?" Sarah sealed the last container and looked at her former colleague with sad eyes. "Then you will learn from those mistakes too. That is how everyone grows." 3 months later, the last human transport ship left the galactic community's borders and disappeared into the darkness between stars. They left behind empty offices, detailed instruction manuals, and polite thank you notes in dozens of languages. The galaxy suddenly felt much larger and much more dangerous than it had in decades. And in the silence that followed, the other species began to realize just how much they had depended on the quiet humans who had always been there to help. 3 months after the humans left, Captain Morvex of the Vorthon merchant ship Golden Wing stared at his navigation computer in growing panic. The screen showed nothing but error messages in a language he could not read. Around him, his crew of 6 worked frantically at their stations, but none of them could make sense of what had gone wrong. "The hyperspace beacon network is not responding," reported his engineer, a thick-shelled being named Keth. "The computer says the access codes are no longer valid." "That is impossible," Morvex growled. "These beacon networks have worked perfectly for 30 years. They do not just stop working, but they had stopped working, not just for the Golden Wing, but for every ship in this sector." Outside the viewport, Morvex could see dozens of other vessels floating helplessly in space around Waystation Kepler 442. Cargo ships, passenger transports, military vessels, all of them trapped because their navigation systems had suddenly gone blind. The humans had built the hyperspace beacon network 40 years ago. They had offered it freely to every species that wanted to use it, asking for nothing in return except that everyone follow the basic safety protocols. The network made interstellar travel safer and faster than anyone had thought possible. Ships could jump from beacon to beacon across the galaxy in a matter of days instead of months. Now the network was dark. On the Council homeworld, Guildmaster Throck of the Vorthon Merchant Association slammed his 4 fists on the meeting table. "This is sabotage," he declared to the emergency session of trade representatives. "The humans have deliberately shut down our transportation systems to punish us. Have we tried contacting them? Asked Representative Sela from the aquatic realms, her voice bubbling through the water-filled communication tank. Of course we tried, snapped Throck. Every message we send to human space comes back with the same automatic reply. The Terran Federation wishes you well but has no current diplomatic openings. Please respect our privacy. Council Archivist Pitel, a being of pure energy contained in crystalline storage matrices, shimmered with what might have been confusion. I have been reviewing the technical specifications for the beacon network. The humans designed it with multiple layers of security protocols. They shared operational access with all member species, but they retained control of the core systems. A cold silence fell over the room. Slowly, the implications began to sink in. Are you saying the humans can turn off our entire transportation network whenever they want? Asked someone from the back of the room. Not just the transportation network, Patel replied, their energy form pulsing with growing alarm. I have been checking other systems as well. The psychological warfare defense grid that protects us from mind control attacks. Human-designed. The Galactic Emergency Response Network. Human-built. The communication relay systems that let us talk across interstellar distances. Human technology. Representative Sila's water tank began bubbling more rapidly as she became agitated. How many of our critical systems depend on human technology? Patel's form dimmed. I am still calculating, but the preliminary assessment suggests most of them. The meeting dissolved into chaos as representatives rushed to contact their home governments. Within hours, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The problems were not limited to transportation. On the industrial world of Corvin Prime, the massive mining computers that managed asteroid extraction operations had reverted to backup systems that were 18 months out of date. Without current gravitational calculations and orbital projections, mining ships kept arriving at empty coordinates where asteroids should have been. The Zeltharian government discovered that their planetary defense computers could no longer identify potentially hostile ships. The friend or foe identification system that had prevented accidental wars for decades was showing error messages in Earth Standard. Database connection lost. Please contact System Administrator. Most frightening of all, the Galactic Emergency Response Network, the system that coordinated help during plagues, natural disasters, and other crises, displayed a simple message on every screen. Service discontinued. Thank you for your cooperation. Admiral Kresh of the Hegemony Warfleet found himself facing a problem that made his military mind reel. His ship's tactical computers were showing stellar navigation data that was over a year old. Stars had moved. Planets had shifted in their orbits. Asteroids had changed course. Without current information, his fleet could not safely travel between star systems. How long has our navigation been dependent on human updates? He asked his chief technical officer. Lieutenant Vash, an insectoid being with compound eyes that reflected light in nervous patterns, consulted his datapad. According to these records, always, sir, the humans have been providing real-time stellar cartography updates since we first started using their beacon network. We never developed our own systems because theirs worked so well. Kresh felt something cold settle in his stomach. Are you telling me that without the humans we cannot navigate safely in space? Not without significant risk, sir. Space is not static. Things move constantly. The humans were tracking and calculating all those movements for everyone. Now that they are gone, we are flying blind. Kresh finished grimly. The scope of the crisis became clear over the following weeks. The humans had not been mere participants in galactic civilization. They had been its foundation. Every major system, every critical network, every essential service had human fingerprints on it somewhere. Not because they had forced their technology on anyone, but because other species had gratefully accepted their help and then forgotten where that help came from. Dr. Yila Senth, a cybernetics specialist from the aquatic realms, spent days studying the abandoned human installations on Council Station Alpha. What she found made her feel sick with realization. The humans had designed everything to work together. Their communication networks talked to their transportation systems. Their emergency response protocols integrated with their defense networks. Their trade management software connected to their diplomatic databases. It was not just individual pieces of technology. It was an entire ecosystem of interconnected systems that made modern galactic civilization possible. And they had built safeguards into everything. Not malicious code or hidden backdoors, but simple authentication systems that required regular updates from human administrators. When the humans left, the systems had not crashed or exploded. They had simply stopped working. "It is actually quite elegant," Dr. Senth reported to the emergency council session. "The humans designed their systems to fail gracefully. Nothing was destroyed. All the data is intact, but without their administrative oversight, the systems will not function. So we just need to bypass their security protocols," suggested Delegate Vexhai, though his crystalline features seemed less bright than usual. "It is not that simple," Dr. Senth explained. "These are not simple password locks. The security protocols are woven into the fundamental architecture of each system. To bypass them would require rebuilding everything from scratch." "How long would that take?" asked Council Leader Zifex. Dr. Senth was quiet for a long moment. "For one system? Perhaps 5 years if we had the technical expertise. But we are talking about thousands of interconnected systems across hundreds of worlds, and we do not have the technical expertise. The humans were always the ones who understood how it all worked. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The other species had not been partners with humanity in building galactic civilization. They had been customers. The humans had done most of the actual work, quietly and efficiently. While everyone else had focused on politics and profit and prestige, long-range sensors detected no trace of human activity in their former territories. It was as if Earth and all its colonies had simply vanished from the universe. Scout ships sent to investigate reported that the human star systems appeared normal from a distance, but something was blocking detailed scans. The humans had found a way to hide themselves from detection. "They have been planning this for a very long time," whispered Council Leader Zifex during a private meeting with the other senior leaders. "Every system they built, every service they provided, every piece of technology they shared, they designed it all to depend on their continued presence." "But why?" asked Delegate Morvac. "What did they gain from making themselves so essential?" Zifex's energy form flickered with something that might have been shame. "I think they genuinely wanted to help, and we convinced ourselves that their helpfulness was a sign of weakness rather than strength." Outside the council chambers, the galaxy continued to struggle with the growing crisis. Ships remained stranded. Communication networks operated sporadically. Emergency services were overwhelmed by disasters they could not predict or prevent. And in the silence left by humanity's departure, the other species began to understand what they had lost. It was not just technology or services or systems. It was the knowledge that someone, somewhere was watching and listening and ready to help when things went wrong. For 37 years, humans had been the galaxy's safety net. Now the net was gone and everyone was learning how far they could fall. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared, and Dr. Yila Senth felt like she was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Her laboratory on Aquatic Station 7 was filled with human technology that she had spent weeks carefully taking apart and studying. Every component told the same story. The humans had not just participated in galactic civilization, they had been its invisible architects. The breakthrough came when she discovered something hidden deep in the memory cores of an abandoned human communication relay. It was a maintenance log that had been running automatically for 15 years, recording every single adjustment, repair, and update that human technicians had made to keep the galactic communication network running smoothly. The log contained over 2 million entries. Dr. Senth stared at the data streaming across her screens and felt a chill run through her aquatic form. 2 million problems that the humans had quietly identified and fixed. 2 million potential failures that they had prevented. 2 million reasons why the galaxy's communication systems had worked flawlessly for decades. And every entry was tagged with the same note: "Issue resolved. No action required from local authorities." She called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Council's Technical Assessment Committee. The conference room was only half full. Many species were too busy dealing with their own crises to attend meetings. But those who came listened in growing horror as she presented her findings. "They were not just maintaining the systems," she explained, her voice bubbling with emotion through the translation speakers. "They were constantly improving them. Every day, human technicians across the galaxy were identifying problems we never even knew existed and solving them before they became disasters." Councillor Mathak, whose insectoid features clicked with agitation, leaned forward in his chair. Show us the hyperspace beacon network analysis. Dr. Senth activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. The three-dimensional image showed the galaxy's transportation network as it had existed 6 months ago. A beautiful web of interconnected routes that allowed safe travel between thousands of worlds. Then she switched to current data, and gasps echoed through the room. The network looked like a broken spiderweb. Random gaps appeared everywhere, forcing ships to take dangerous longer routes or wait for uncertain windows when travel might be safe. What had once been a journey of 3 days now took weeks if it could be completed at all. The beacon network required constant adjustments, Dr. Senth explained. Gravitational changes from stellar movements, interference from solar flares, orbital shifts of planets and asteroids. The humans were calculating and compensating for thousands of variables every single day. Without those adjustments, the network is slowly becoming unusable. But surely they left instructions, protested Delegate Vexhai, though his crystalline form seemed dimmer than usual. Technical manuals, operational procedures, something we can use to maintain the systems ourselves. Dr. Senth nodded sadly. They did. I have reviewed them all. The manuals are extremely detailed and beautifully written, but they assume a level of technical knowledge and institutional memory that we simply do not have. The humans had been working with these systems for decades. They understood not just how they worked, but why they worked, and what could go wrong. She activated another display, showing the psychological warfare defense grid that protected the galaxy from various forms of mental manipulation and mind control. This system processes over 1 billion data points every hour, looking for patterns that might indicate psychic attacks or mimetic weapons. The humans programmed it to recognize threats that most of us cannot even imagine. Without their oversight, the system has begun generating false alarms, thousands of them every day. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had not just been providing services. They had been acting as the galaxy's immune system, constantly fighting off threats that other species never even noticed. Council leader Zyfex materialized their energy form into a roughly humanoid shape, a sign of deep distress among their species. How extensive was their involvement in our daily operations? Dr. Senth pulled up a comprehensive analysis that had taken her research team months to compile. Based on our investigations, human technology or human oversight was involved in approximately 87% of all essential galactic infrastructure. Transportation, communication, emergency services, defense systems, trade management, diplomatic protocols, scientific research networks, medical databases, educational resources, environmental monitoring systems, and much more. 87%, repeated Counselor Emathak in a whisper. How did we not know this? Because they made it look easy, Dr. Senth replied. Every system they built was designed to operate smoothly without requiring attention from users. When something went wrong, the humans fixed it before anyone else even noticed there was a problem. We became accustomed to everything just working. She brought up another display showing financial records. The humans were providing most of these services either for free or at cost. Their emergency response network operated at a loss for 37 years. Their educational databases were freely available to all species. Their medical research was shared openly. Even their transportation network charged only enough to cover maintenance and improvements. But why? Asked Delegate Morvac from the Hegemony Worlds. What did they get out of it? Dr. Senth had wondered about this herself. She had studied thousands of hours of archived human communications, diplomatic records, and personal logs. The answer was both simple and incomprehensible to most galactic minds. They seemed to genuinely enjoy solving problems, she said finally. Human psychology is complex, but from what I can understand, they derived satisfaction from making things work better. They saw a need, they filled it, and they moved on to the next problem. It was not about power or profit, it was about helping. Former Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin's final speech to the Council had been archived, and Dr. Senth played a portion of it for the committee. The Terran Federation has never claimed to be irreplaceable. We simply try to help where we can. At the time, we interpreted that as modesty, admitted Counselor Mathak. We thought they were being humble about their contributions. Now I realize they were being literal. They genuinely saw themselves as helpers, not leaders. Dr. Senth nodded. And we treated them like servants instead of partners. Every year the council passed more regulations limiting human activities, imposed more taxes on human services, and made more assumptions that the humans would simply accept whatever treatment they received because they needed us more than we needed them. She pulled up voting records from the past decade. Resolution after resolution showed the same pattern, the galactic community consistently voting to restrict or tax human activities, always with the assumption that humans would comply rather than leave. We were wrong, she said simply. We needed them far more than they needed us. The scope of the crisis became clearer as more reports arrived from across the galaxy. The Vegan Republic's entire financial system had collapsed when human-designed fraud detection algorithms went offline. The Centauri Mining Consortium discovered that their operations depended on asteroid tracking calculations that only human computers could perform accurately. Even the Council's own voting systems used security protocols that required regular updates from human cryptographic specialists. But perhaps the most devastating revelation came when Dr. Senth accessed the archives of the Galactic Emergency Response Network. She found records showing that over the past 4 decades, human teams had responded to over 50,000 emergencies across the galaxy. Plagues, natural disasters, industrial accidents, terrorist attacks, civil wars. The humans had been quietly deploying aid and expertise wherever it was needed. The records showed something else too. The humans had not just responded to crises, they had prevented hundreds of them. Their early warning systems had detected potential problems months or years in advance, allowing preventive measures to be taken before disasters occurred. They were not just our emergency responders, Dr. Senth told the stunned committee members. They were our guardians. They were watching over all of us all the time, making sure we stayed safe. Long-range reconnaissance missions finally returned with data about the human territories. The news was disturbing in its implications. Earth and its colonies still existed, but they were surrounded by some kind of advanced spatial distortion that made detailed observation impossible. The humans had not just left. They had made themselves undetectable and unreachable. They planned this withdrawal for decades, Dr. Senth concluded in her final report to the Council. Every system they built included safeguards that would allow them to disconnect cleanly if they chose to leave. They were always prepared for the possibility that they might need to walk away from us. And we gave them every reason to do exactly that, added Council Leader Zyfex, their energy form flickering with what might have been regret. As the meeting concluded, the participants sat in uncomfortable silence. Outside the conference room, the galaxy continued to struggle with cascading system failures and growing chaos. The humans were gone, taking with them not just their technology, but their institutional memory. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy looked very different than it had before. Ambassador Vexahai stood at the observation deck of Council Station Alpha, staring out at the traffic control disaster that had once been an orderly parade of starships. Vessels from dozens of species moved in chaotic patterns, following conflicting navigation protocols as each government tried to implement its own version of what the humans had done so effortlessly. Corvin freighter nearly collided with a Zeltharian passenger transport as their respective traffic control systems gave contradictory instructions. Warning alarms blared throughout the station as emergency protocols activated. It took 3 hours to sort out the confusion and get both ships safely docked. Vexai had seen similar scenes play out every day for months. What had once taken minutes now took hours. What had once been safe was now dangerous. What had once been simple was now impossibly complex. The Silk Road Nebula shipping route is completely blocked, reported Station Commander Olex, a thick-shelled being whose normally steady voice carried notes of exhaustion. 7 different species are trying to manage traffic control using 7 different systems. Nothing is compatible. Ships are backing up for light years in every direction. The Silk Road Nebula had been one of the galaxy's most important trade routes, allowing cargo ships to cross between the inner and outer rim territories in just 5 days. The humans had managed the complex navigation required to thread ships safely through the nebula's shifting energy fields, and gravitational anomalies. Now, with each species trying to implement their own traffic control methods, the route had become a logistical nightmare. "How long until we can get it working again?" HFY asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Our best estimates suggest 18 months, assuming we can get all 7 species to agree on a unified system," Commander Olex replied. "But the hegemony insists their protocol is superior. The Vegan Republic refuses to use anyone else's software, and the Corvin Collective claims their method is the only one that accounts properly for gravitational effects." HFY felt something twist in his crystalline core. 18 months to fix something that had worked perfectly for 30 years. And that was just one shipping route out of hundreds that needed attention. The problems extended far beyond transportation. The Rimward Rebellion, which had been a minor annoyance when human peacekeepers were quietly containing it, had exploded into a full-scale war that was consuming entire star systems. Without humanity's early warning networks, the Council could not even track rebel movements, much less predict their next targets. General Korth of the Combined Defense Forces had requested emergency meetings every week for the past 6 months. His reports painted a picture of growing chaos across the galactic periphery. "The rebels have weapons we cannot identify, and tactics we do not understand," he explained to the latest emergency session. "Our intelligence networks cannot penetrate their communications. Our strategic computers cannot predict their movements. Everything we knew about fighting them came from human analysis and human expertise. But surely our own military specialists can adapt," suggested Counselor Mathak. Though his insectoid features clicked with nervous uncertainty, General Korth's expression was grim. The humans had been studying the rebellion for decades. They understood the rebels' psychology, their supply chains, their recruitment methods, their leadership structure. We treated their reports as routine intelligence updates. We never realized we were completely dependent on their analysis. The rebellion was not the only conflict that had spiraled out of control. Ancient territorial disputes that human diplomats had carefully mediated for years suddenly flared into open warfare. The Altarian-Corvin border conflict, dormant for 15 years, had restarted within weeks of humanity's departure. The Central World's resource war had claimed 3 entire star systems, before anyone could organize a meaningful peace negotiation. But perhaps the most devastating consequences were felt by the younger species, those civilizations that had achieved spaceflight during the human era and had never developed independent technological capabilities. The Corvani had built their entire civilization around human-provided hyperspace technology. Their ships, their communication systems, their computer networks, even their basic manufacturing processes depended on human designs and human expertise. When the humans left, Corvin society had essentially been knocked back to pre-spaceflight levels of technology. Ambassador HFY of the Corvin Collective had aged visibly in the months since humanity's departure. His tentacles, once bright purple with health, had faded to a dull gray color that indicated chronic stress among his species. 40% of our population lives on colony worlds that depend on regular supply runs from our homeworld, he explained to anyone who would listen. Without reliable hyperspace travel, we cannot maintain those colonies. We are facing the collapse of our interstellar civilization. The Vegan Republic faced similar challenges. Their entire educational system had been built around human-designed learning algorithms that adapted to individual student needs. Their medical system used human diagnostic databases. Their agricultural system depended on human environmental monitoring networks. Without these systems, the Republic was struggling to maintain even basic governmental functions. Young Representative Sela had replaced her elders in the Aquatic Realms delegation, and she brought a perspective that made many older delegates uncomfortable. "We did not just lose a trade partner," she said during one particularly heated council session. "We lost our technological foundation. My generation grew up assuming that hyperspace travel, instantaneous communication, and reliable emergency services were simply facts of life. We never learned how to build or maintain these things ourselves because the humans were always there to handle it." The psychological impact was perhaps even worse than the technological collapse. Species that had considered themselves advanced and sophisticated were forced to confront the reality that they had been essentially children playing with toys that the humans had built and maintained for them. Dr. Yila Senth had expanded her research beyond technology to study the cultural and psychological effects of humanity's departure. Her findings were disturbing. We are seeing increases in anxiety, depression, and social disorder across multiple species, she reported to the Council's medical committee. Many individuals are experiencing what human psychologists would have called learned helplessness. The feeling that they cannot solve problems or control their environment. The irony was not lost on anyone. The humans had been so good at solving problems that other species had forgotten how to solve problems themselves. When crises arose, everyone's first instinct was to call for human help that would never come. Ambassador Vexhai found himself experiencing emotions that he had never felt before. As an Altarian, he had been raised to value strength, independence, and superiority over other species. But lately, he caught himself remembering conversations with human diplomats and wishing he could ask them for advice. The feeling had a name in human psychology: homesickness. Vexhai was homesick for people who had never been his people, for a time when problems had solutions and crises had endings. "I miss them," he admitted quietly to his aide during a private moment. The admission felt like a betrayal of everything he had been taught to believe about Altarian strength and independence. His aide, a younger Altarian named Zexval, nodded sadly. "We all do, even those who voted to impose the taxes that drove them away. We miss knowing that someone, somewhere, was watching and listening and ready to help when things went wrong." Trade volumes had dropped by 60% across the galaxy as transportation became unreliable and expensive. Scientific research had slowed to a crawl without access to human databases and analysis tools. Diplomatic relations between species had deteriorated as old conflicts resurfaced without human mediation. The Council tried to address each crisis individually, but they lacked the institutional knowledge and technical expertise that the humans had provided. Every solution they attempted seemed to create 2 new problems. Every system they tried to repair revealed 10 more systems that needed attention. Emergency committees formed to address specific issues, but coordination between them was nearly impossible without humanity's neutral arbitration services. The Corvin representatives refused to work with the Altarians because of their ongoing border dispute. The hegemony delegates walked out of meetings whenever the Vegan Republic suggested diplomatic solutions to military problems. Ancient rivalries and cultural misunderstandings, carefully managed by human diplomats for decades, exploded into open hostility. "We are reverting to the fractured, warring civilizations we were before the humans arrived," observed Council leader Zyfex during a private meeting with senior delegates. They were not just providing services. They were providing the social glue that held our diverse species together. Some species began withdrawing from galactic affairs entirely, unable to cope without the human-designed infrastructure that had made interstellar civilization possible. Others formed smaller regional alliances based on geographic proximity rather than shared interests. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away, and Council leader Zyfex stood alone in the great assembly hall that had once hosted representatives from 47 different worlds. Now only 23 species maintained regular attendance at Council meetings. The others had either withdrawn from galactic affairs entirely or joined smaller regional alliances that barely acknowledged the Council's authority. The hall felt enormous and empty. Where once hundreds of delegates had debated with passion and purpose, now a few dozen beings sat scattered across the vast space, their voices echoing in the silence. The translation machines hummed quietly, processing conversations in languages that seemed somehow smaller and lonelier than they had before. Zyfex materialized, their energy form into a roughly humanoid shape, a gesture of respect that they had learned from human diplomats years ago. The irony was not lost on them. Even now, even after 5 years of silence, the humans continued to influence how other species interacted with each other. Today marks the 5th anniversary of our attempts to re-establish contact with humanity, Zyfex announced to the assembled delegates. Their voice carried clearly in the acoustic space that human engineers had designed to ensure everyone could hear and be heard. Every communication probe sent to their space returns the same message. The Terran Federation wishes you well, but has no current diplomatic openings. Please respect our privacy. The galaxy had stabilized after a fashion, not the confident, interconnected civilization it had been during the human era, but something smaller and more fragmented. Trade moved slowly along carefully negotiated routes. Conflicts were resolved through exhausting diplomatic processes that sometimes took years to produce results that human mediators had once achieved in days. Innovation had ground to a halt as species focused on maintaining what they had, rather than building something new. In the years following humanity's departure, thousands of theories had emerged about where they had gone and what they were doing. Some believed the humans had transcended physical existence and become beings of pure energy, like the ancient celestials. Others suggested they had found new galaxies to explore, leaving their old neighbors behind like outgrown toys. The most unsettling theory, proposed by several xenopsychologists who had studied human behavior patterns, was that humanity had simply chosen to ignore the galactic community entirely, like adults who had grown tired of mediating disputes between children and decided to let them work things out for themselves. Ambassador Vexhai, now elderly and serving as the Council's unofficial historian, had spent years studying human culture through their abandoned archives and personal records. His research had become an obsession, driven by a need to understand what the galaxy had lost and why they had lost it. His final report to the Council contained a single sentence that had haunted every delegate who read it. Humans have a phrase, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." We were so busy holding the door open for ourselves, we forgot to thank them for keeping it from hitting us. The practical effects of humanity's absence were still felt every day. Interstellar travel remained dangerous and unreliable without their beacon networks. Communication across galactic distances was slow and prone to interference without their relay systems. Emergency response to disasters was haphazard and often too late without their coordination networks. But the psychological effects ran deeper. An entire generation of young beings had grown up in a galaxy where problems did not automatically have solutions, where crises could not be quickly resolved, where calling for help might not bring any response at all. Dr. Yila Senth, now the galaxy's leading expert on human technology and culture, had documented the long-term changes in galactic society. Her reports painted a picture of a civilization that had learned to survive but had forgotten how to thrive. We have become risk-averse in ways that would have been unthinkable during the human era, she explained to a gathering of researchers and historians. We avoid ambitious projects because we no longer have confidence that problems can be solved. We maintain redundant systems because we no longer trust that help will come when things fail. We have learned to expect disappointment rather than hope for success. The younger species had been hit hardest by the transition. The Corvin Collective had managed to maintain basic interstellar travel by retrofitting their ships with pre-human technology, but their society remained a shadow of its former self. Corvin colonies that had once been thriving centers of culture and commerce were now isolated outposts struggling to maintain basic life support. The Vegan Republic had fared slightly better, but only by abandoning much of their territory and consolidating their population on a few worlds that could be supported by their limited technological capabilities. Their once proud educational system now focused on teaching practical skills rather than encouraging innovation or exploration. Some species had adapted more successfully. The Altarians, with their emphasis on self-reliance and strength, had managed to develop crude but functional versions of some human technologies. The hegemony had reorganized their society around military efficiency, creating a harsh but stable civilization that could function without external support. But even the successful adaptations came at a cost. The cooperative spirit that had characterized galactic civilization during the human era had been replaced by suspicion and competition. Species that had once shared knowledge and resources now guarded their secrets jealously. The common projects and joint ventures that had driven galactic progress for decades had been abandoned in favor of purely national interests. The Council still met, but its role had diminished significantly. Without human mediation and coordination, it had become little more than a forum for formal complaints and territorial disputes. The grand vision of a unified galactic civilization working together toward common goals had been replaced by a patchwork of regional powers focused on local survival. Ambassador Vexhai often found himself alone in the archives, reading through records of council sessions from the human era. The contrast was striking. Debates that had once focused on ambitious infrastructure projects and scientific collaborations now centered on trade disputes and border conflicts. The language itself had changed, where once delegates had spoken of we and us and our shared future. Now they spoke of them and theirs and protecting our interests have become smaller, he admitted to his aide, during one of their regular review sessions, not just in terms of territory or population, but in terms of vision. We think smaller thoughts and attempt smaller deeds. We have lost the confidence that great things are possible. The most painful reminder of what had been lost came from the abandoned human installations that still dotted the galaxy. The Council had declared them historical sites, forbidden to disturb or dismantle. They stood as monuments to a time when the galaxy had been larger and more connected than it was now. On Council Station Alpha, the former human embassy remained exactly as the humans had left it. The reception area with its carefully tended garden, the conference rooms with their precisely arranged furniture, the offices with their empty desks and blank computer screens, a maintenance droid overlooked during the human withdrawal, continued its programmed duties. Every day it cleaned the empty halls and watered the plants in the reception garden. The flowers still bloomed despite the silence. Visitors to the embassy often spoke of the strange emotions the place evoked. Sadness, certainly, but also something more complex. A kind of homesickness for a home they had never appreciated while they had it. The garden had become an unofficial memorial where beings from different species would leave. Small tokens of respect or regret, long-range, sensor arrays occasionally, detected signals from the direction of human space, but they were too faint and too encrypted to decipher. The humans were still out there, still building, still working, still solving problems, but they were doing it without the galactic community that had once depended on them. 10 years after the departure, a single transmission reached the Council's emergency communication frequencies. It came on the same channel that humans had once used for routine diplomatic correspondence, and it was brief. "We are well. We hope you are too. The door remains open, but only when you are ready to walk through it as equals. Take your time. We have learned patience." The Terran Federation. The transmission lasted 37 seconds. No further communications followed. The message sparked months of debate and analysis. What did the humans mean by equals? How would the galactic community prove they were ready? What kind of relationship were the humans offering? But as time passed without additional messages, most delegates concluded that the transmission had been exactly what it appeared to be. A simple statement of fact. The humans were alive and well somewhere out in the cosmic dark. They bore no ill will toward their former colleagues, and they would consider re-establishing contact when the galactic community had grown into something worthy of their partnership. The implications were both hopeful and humbling. The humans had not abandoned the galaxy out of anger or spite. They had walked away because they recognized that the relationship had become unhealthy for everyone involved.